Well, it's time we take a break from our normal episodes and have another rousing edition of My Friend's Boat. It's a boat tour! You know, I say it all the time, the best thing about our cruising lifestyle is the people we meet along the way. And if you've been watching these episodes for a while now, then you've undoubtedly seen Marga and Greg and their boat Dogfish. But, you know, there really is kind of a point to these boat tours. Number one, it's because I love boats, and this gets me down and dirty in our friends' boats, up close and personal, and I kind of like that. But also, it's to show that there really is no one-size-fits-all, do-it-all boat for everybody, and everybody gets out here by different ways and means. Marga and Greg bought Dogfish as a project, and not really a little project that just needed a little spit and polish to clean it up. It was a major project. It didn't have a rudder or steering system, it didn't have an engine, needed fuel tanks, it needed everything. The list goes on and on. Because they did so much work to the boat, it's hard to squeeze all of these little points of interest into one small 25 to 30 minute video. I think what I'm going to try to do with this episode is just cover the interior, or at least some of it, some of the points of interest. And then maybe I can talk Marga and Greg into another episode the next time we see them with some of the exterior features. There's a lot to go over on this boat, and it's amazingly well done. But for me, part of what makes this boat tour so special is that Marga's going to show us around. Not only is Marga just awesome, she's also a professional boat wright. And she knows more about boat systems and installations than probably anyone I know. So it's kind of a treat that she's going to show us around. Thanks, Marga. You're the best. And you at home, thanks for watching.
So this is my boat. It's a Kelly Peterson 44. Its name is Dogfish. It's a mid-70s design and 44 feet long. It's a center cockpit. And we're down below. I can show you where everything is. So the one thing about this boat tour is that we're in La Paz for the summer, and so we've totally kind of pickled the boat. So when we go outside, you'll see that it's all the sails are taken down and the lines are messenger lined and all the stuff. So we can't really get into the V-berth right now because all the surfboards and solar panels and everything are in there, but this is the V-berth. Oops. There's two heads on the boat. It's kind of a standard 2-cabin, 2-head kind of couple charter configuration. A lot of these boats were used for charter originally. Here's one head that, again, has our jib and all this stuff in it. But when we're sailing, when the boat's not pickled, these are nice and clean. We like having it open and clear. So this is the main salon. I don't know what's interesting here. This is for the cat. It's a keel-stepped mast. The table could become a bunk, but we never really use that. This is the galley. So we, the standard stuff, stove. This is the fridge. Every boat's a compromise, and through the design years, there's definitely been like different trends. I think by modern standards, this would be a smaller galley. But both Greg and I love cooking and love making all different kinds of food. And we have everything that we had at home, less a food processor in this galley. So it's actually been really functional and great for us. And we kind of have like our bulk storage here. The previous owner added a little shelf. And this is where we put a lot of our produce. So like when we're going for not going to go to a grocery store for a month or two, then this is all filled up. As well as in here, this is a great dark, cool spot for like potatoes and onions and that kind of stuff. And then we have the drying rack, which is, just has to be there. It's always the drying racks and hampers, like where you put your wet dishes and your dirty clothes on boats is always a little bit of a, I guess it has to be there kind of thing. This is the Nav Station. So we bought this boat as a project boat, and it didn't have any navigation stuff on it, no electronics. So that was kind of a cool opportunity for us to see, like, well, what do we want? And the system that we've set up has been really functional and really cheap. We're pretty happy with it. We bought a 12-volt LED monitor that's hardwired with a regulator. And then in here, this little guy is actually a solid-state ship's computer. We started out with a little Mac Mini, and now we've switched to a PC. And it's super cheap. We actually have a spare one. We have SD cards with all our navigation software on there, which we run OpenCPN. And so it's just been very functional, very adaptable, and I'd recommend it. And then you'll see these throughout the boat. So it's basically like a reusable desiccant pack. So it's like a portable dehumidifier. So next we'll go through the little Hobbit hole passageway. So I mentioned that this is a center cockpit boat. It is a center cockpit boat that doesn't have kind of like the wedding cake look that people talk about. So the cockpit is low and the cabin house is low. And one of the drawbacks, so there's trade-offs for everything, one of the drawbacks of that means that this passage to the aft cabin you have to duck. And if you look closely you can see that we've actually cut out the original tunnel was even a little bit lower, so we just raised it up a little bit to help a little bit with the head banging. Our battery bank is actually down below here, and above it is our main electrical cabinet. So this is a design that I made that I think it met some pretty cool challenges. Like the batteries are above the bilge, yet they're on center line. We also have a battery watering system for the batteries down here because they're not super easily accessible, so we can just top them up semi-remotely, which is great. It also keeps water in the line, so our batteries are never running out of water and they're never getting overfilled and we're never spilling out electrolyte. And on top here we have kind of our inverter, our battery charger, our solar panel chargers. This is the main heart of the electrical system. Because we have the batteries down here, I did put in some very low speed fans, so the battery compartment has its own ventilation to kind of keep any gases from moving up into this compartment. Instead it just gets drawn with airflow across here. I do a lot of electrical work on boats, and that's something that ABYC is particular about, and even some of the electronics that you buy, what they'll specify, hey, don't install this in a battery compartment, and the reason for that is the gases that batteries can emit when they're off-gassing are kind of corrosive. And so typically, you know, your batteries aren't off-gassing a crazy amount, and typically electronics do have a kind of a anti-corrosive coating on them anyway, but it's good to keep in mind of that kind of isolating things a little bit. I do all the wiring and stuff on the boat, and I love to put little labels on all the wires so that years from now when I've forgotten what I've done, I can say, oh, okay, this is from the solar panel bus, you know, this is the size of that fuse, you know, this is where this wiring comes in. If there's any odd stuff about the wiring, I'll say, oh, you know, it's coming from, you know, the water maker, and there's a fuse in line or something like that. And that's actually the labeling is something that the previous owner of the boat, who was an amazing electrician and engineer, he started, so it was an easy convention to carry on, because it was like when we bought the boat and it was just a complete mess, and we didn't have, it's like we bought the boat with a storage unit and the owner was gone, and we kind of bought it sight unseen, and we just kind of had to figure out, it was like buying a big jigsaw puzzle, and he had this whole like boxes and boxes of parts and all this stuff, and we would just have to kind of think of like, what was he thinking here, what was he planning, because we knew he had something good in mind. And the labels on the wiring at least let us help, like, know a little bit of what was going on, because he was not available to contact or anything like that. So it's like, what were you thinking, you know, with for wiring in the fuel pump, that the fuel pump's not there, the fuel tanks aren't there, like, we just know there's you know, this wire, and then, you know, it just, so I think it'd be interesting to have him back aboard one day and to see how closely we, with the parts that he gave us, how closely we came to his original vision, or if we kind of came to it a completely like new outcome. So this is the engine room. This is one of the things that I love about this boat. The engine room access is really awesome. So the engine room is one of the things that I spent a lot of time laying out and thinking about when we bought the boat. When we bought the boat, it didn't have a cockpit sole, it didn't have a steering system. This whole engine room was completely naked. The new owner had bought a new engine and a new little DC generator, which is basically a little DC or little Kubota engine with the alternator strapped on the side. So he had bought those things, but nothing was installed. They were like on pallets and in the storage unit and stuff. This engine is a 50 horsepower Yanmar engine, and it's within the horsepower range of the original, but it's physically a lot smaller. That was awesome because it actually allowed us to move the engine forward and then fit this little DC generator aft. And the DC generator is on a custom little mount there. So we've actually fit two engines into an engine room that used to have one honking huge engine. It's still laid out in a way that everything is entirely accessible. Other stuff we have going on in the engine room is we put synthetic steering in. The original steering run for the boat was coming down the binnacle and going to the port side, but that had all been torn out already by the previous owner because that really cut into the port locker, which right now you're seeing where these rake cores are. This coolant is, those are actually doors that open into the port locker. Under those doors are the two new fuel tanks that I designed and put in. They're aluminum tanks. What's cool with synthetic steering, as with synthetic rigging, there's a lot of upsides. One is that you can carry spares really easily, so we can resplice steering lines like pretty quickly. We have extra line aboard. That's nice to know. But another thing, especially for center cockpits where the run is long, is that you can design systems that are much lower friction, but also do wacky angles that you wouldn't be able to do with normal wire steering. So this just kind of goes to the back bulkhead there, and then I put some clear tubing from McMaster, like polycarbonate tubing, to protect the lines as they run near the flywheel for the generator. The other thing we have going on in the engine room are the kind of two-tier hot switchable rake cores. And then another thing that I think is good for cruising boats to have that I don't know how many people have is this guy. So that is a vacuum gauge, so that's not the most exotic thing ever, but it's one that has a little needle on it that, well, has 3 needles on it. One you set to the maximum that you ever want to see. The other one tells you the instantaneous reading, and the third one, the drag needle, tells you what the highest reading is that you've seen while underway. So the purpose of having that in your fuel line is so you can do preventative maintenance. That's, as someone who works on boats and as someone who hates breaking down, we try to do as much preventative maintenance as possible. So instead of just changing them all the time preemptively, with that rake core gauge on there with the drag needle, I can see, hey, you know, we used to, you know, never tick above 2 or 3, and now we're at 5 or 10. Maybe I should swap these out before we break down in the ocean when it's rough and the crud has finally worked its way into the system. So that kind of thinking can be interesting. You know, boats are complex systems, and they have a lot going on, but it's not a space shuttle. You know, like you can look at these things and you're going to have things break, but you can also look at it like a complex machine that does a lot for you, but also has needs, and you can either be ahead of it or behind it. And being ahead of it is so much less stressful and so much cheaper. So that's kind of our take on maintenance on Dogfish. The water maker had been one of the few issues that we have had since cruising. We bought a used one on eBay, and it just never worked properly. We finally bought a new water maker, and all our problems have disappeared. After so many, you think, well, okay, I'm going to buy a used water maker and it'll just be rebuild kits or a new membrane. Okay, and that's this much money. Okay, and then it still makes sense to buy a used one. But we got into the position of, we had rebuilt the thing. We had put new membranes in. Everything was as it should be, and yet it still just wasn't kind of producing. And we think that it was just like little micro scratches like in the cylinder. So there are these things that are kind of like, well, it's the same. I had a old carburetor once on a motorcycle, and it was just, I'd rebuilt the thing, and it was every replaceable part had been replaced, and it still just didn't work. And then I put a new carburetor in, and it was so easy, and it worked. So sometimes you just have to go new. So that's the story with the water maker. We made it to the aft cabin. Okay, this is where we sleep. One thing we did here is we removed the doors. So KPs normally have sliding teak doors. We decided to remove it to get a little more airflow, because what we typically are storing in here is clothes. So we just have these bins. And then we have a little lee cloth that goes on the opening that we put up when we're sailing, so all our clothes doesn't come flying out. Similar to this idea, all around here we have baskets too, and they still need a little refining. It's still a little messy, and we just spray painted the baskets to like try to make a designer boat. Our boat stock had a lot of dead space on this shelf. It has, you can kind of see there's like cleats here that a little panel with upholstery and teak trim would go to, but all that space behind it was lost. So that's something to think about if you're cruising. Airflow's good, being able to see your wiring and, you know, see any leaks is good, and then having more space is good. So that was a trade-off that we decided to make. We still have the old panels at home, but now we have these baskets, more place to put them. And I don't like to see wiring in my face, but I like when I can open a cabinet and it's there, or it's behind the baskets or something like that. And then this is the cat box. We just picked up a stray cat last fall, and we got him this little box so that when we're sailing he can have a little safe place, or we can zip him up into it to be his little safe space. And when we're sailing, this box goes here, so he's kind of nestled in there and doesn't go flying around. And we learned that by having him go flying around maybe a few times. Greg and I always laugh about this because nothing is simple on a boat. So like, okay, yeah, you're choosing how to lay out your engine room. You kind of expect that that's gonna like result in a lot of conversations about choices and pros and cons and costs and all this stuff. But what you don't expect is that those conversations are also going to bleed into like, what Tupperware should we have? And how many should we have? And what sheets should we have? So like bed sheets, it's just one of those things where it's like, well, we're not gonna have extra bed sheets. We also are not gonna wash them for a long period in between wash. You know, it's gonna be a long period in between washes. And we're in these really hot climates, and we're salty, and like, you know, you might think it doesn't matter, which was our initial thing. We didn't think it mattered, and we had some IKEA sheets, and you end up dropping off your sheets at some laundromat on shore. Not Jeff and Brenda, because they have a washer and dryer, and if we could all be there, that'd be awesome. I mean, that's awesome. That is like the best solution. But you ended up dropping them off somewhere, and they wash them with God knows what, and it just came back and it was kind of ripped and stuff. It was low quality sheet to start with. And then trying to buy new sheets in Mexico, I don't know, or I should be more specific, trying to buy them in Baja. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's trade rules or stuff, but it's extremely difficult to find. I was unable to find sheets that weren't polyester. So I said, okay, I'm overthinking it. Just get the polyester sheets. Like, it's not a life and death situation, Marga. So I got polyester sheets, and they were terrible. Like, they're so sweaty and so gross. So I was visiting Greg back in LA, and there on the shelf at Walmart, you can buy cotton sheets. And so we bought Egyptian cotton sheets because I realized these other sheets we had aboard from 10 or 15 years ago that were Egyptian cotton, after all the same crazy washes as our cheap IKEA sheets, they felt great, they looked great, they were my favorite to sleep in, so it's the sheets, yeah.
It's the sheets that
It's the little things. Or if it's interesting. Yeah, actually this is interesting, I think. So this is more on the synthetic steering. It's important too that you get orange so it looks really cool, because like black would just be boring. The KP44 is not designed to have steering run down the center. So when I was running it, this is a very tight angle here. I had to put this little fair lead block in to just keep the line low and then also redirect it slightly. So we have our steering lines going on either side of the shaft, and obviously because it's the shaft, it's going to be spinning a lot. So again, I just put in some guards in case the steering line ever went slack or anything like that, it wouldn't get kind of wrapped up in the shaft. This is a last drop dripless shaft seal. Dripless shaft seals are awesome because having a dry bilge is awesome. When we were installing the shaft, and I put new cutlass bearings in, of course, as well, I was thinking, okay, well, what do we want to do for our shaft seal? And I discovered this last drop, which is basically, it's a piece of normal marine hose. So that's thick and just like exhaust hose or whatever, thick and wire reinforced, attached to a UHMW gland that has these lip seals in it. These lip seals are the same seals that you would use for your water pump or transmissions. So they're A, easy to get, and then B, if they fail, they don't fail catastrophically in the way that a ripped bellows fails. They start leaking. And so we have one installed in here, and while the shaft was off, I put two in line to use as spares. So if the current one ever starts leaking, we just back off these screws. I pull the old one out, I can just snip it off, and then slide the new one in. Okay, this is the aft head, and the forward one is much bigger. They both technically include showers, which is a little ambitious. But yeah, there are two heads on the boat. We kind of use it, but it's kind of a luxury. We have the aft head, that's basically a seagoing head, so it goes straight overboard. It doesn't have a holding tank. The forward head has a plastic holding tank, so that's the one that we use when we're not at sea, and it lasts us like 2 weeks with two people.
Do you want to talk about your lack of racing stripe?
Yeah, I think it peeled off a number of years ago.
Were you going too fast?
Yeah.
For not having a racing stripe, Margaret goes really fast. You should include that.
It's something that is one of the big reasons that we need to repaint the boat, is so that we can put the racing stripe on. But we've wanted to wait until we're near you guys to do that, so that we can see how yours goes, because I think like if you do it backwards, it'll just make you go slower. And then if you you can be, depending on your angle, you can get into a lot of tricky stuff. You can be bow down, or your stern can like kind of sog down. You can go like that through the water. So you want to be careful. It's a powerful tool that, when used correctly, can yield great results.
Do you want to tell everybody about your blog?
It's I think the most defining feature about my blog is that it's rarely updated. Okay, so
if you want, do you want to tell people about your blog?
Yeah, and I'll tell people about my blog. And maybe my work real quick.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a website. It's svdogfish.com. The site is basically like a total hardly ever updated, quiet little back corner of the world. So join my dad and my mom and Jeff and Brenda on the mailing list. The other thing, so the other thing that I do for money is I fix people's boats. People ask me what I specialize in. My history as a boatwright is that I have worked independently for many years, and then also in a small family-owned yard. And that yard built boats and did big refits and big renovations and stuff. And so I've really done a lot of different, I've worn a lot of different hats working on boats. Everything from systems designs and installation to like actually building fiberglass structures, like big infusions. When we've been cruising, the work that comes up most often is people having electrical issues, sometimes very fundamental electrical issues, like with their battery and charging designs. I end up doing a lot of that. I've also done a lot of hydraulic stuff. People have hydraulic issues. So if you're interested, if you are interested in consulting or interested in seeing if we do travel, so if I might be in your area and you have some projects, big or small, also on the website, SV Dogfish is a little tab where you can click and contact me about boat work.
Thanks for showing us your boat.
It was fun. I like talking about boats.